You wake up one day, and something feels off. The job, the choices, the people you call friends, none of it feels like you. Not fully, not truly. What if the life you're living isn't yours? What if your entire identity was a carefully constructed mask, built from fear, from childhood, from the need to belong? Carl Jung once said, "Life begins when you find yourself, but to find yourself, you'll have to lose the illusion first." The quiet moment when you realize, this life doesn't belong to you. There's no announcement, no fireworks, no grand collapse. It happens in the most ordinary of moments, brushing your teeth, pouring your coffee, staring into your reflection. And suddenly, everything feels wrong. The job, the routine, the relationships, the version of yourself you've been performing. You realize, with a quiet kind of panic, that you've been following a script you didn't write. Worse, you've memorized it so well you forgot it wasn't yours. Carl Jung once said, "Life begins when you find yourself, but to find yourself, you must first admit something terrifying. You might not be living as you. You're not stupid. You're not broken. You were just trained, from a very young age, to be what others needed you to be, long before you knew how to be yourself. Your parents needed you to be good. Society needed you to be normal. Friends needed you to be easygoing. Partners needed you to be stable. And somewhere along the way, you stopped asking the one question that actually mattered. Who am I when no one's watching? Imagine. Someone recorded your entire life, every choice, every belief, every dream. Now ask yourself, how much of it came from you? And how much was inherited, conditioned, rewarded, or feared? This isn't just some philosophical daydream. This is the doorway to everything Jung called individuation, the process of becoming your true self, not just the one you've learned to perform. And if you've ever felt like you're acting your way through life, smiling when you're nodding when you want to scream, saying "I'm fine" when you're not, it's not because you're fake. It's because you've been surviving, performing, disappearing, slowly, skillfully, politely, until one day you wake up in a life that looks perfect, but feels haunted. That's the day everything begins. Not because something outside of you changed, but because for the first time, you noticed. You noticed the ache beneath your routine, the silence behind your smile, the dissonance between the life you have and the life that might have been yours if you'd been free to choose. And now the question stands, if I'm not who they told me to be, then who am I? Not all awakenings are loud. Some are just quiet enough to feel like truth. You weren't born lost. You were handed a map that led you away from yourself. From the moment you arrived in this world, the script began, not with your consent, not from your intuition, but from 1,000 silent expectations that were already waiting for you. You were given a name before you spoke a word. You were assigned a role before you understood choice. Boy or girl, smart or quiet, easy or difficult. You were taught how to smile, how to shrink, how to survive, and you learned fast. You learned that anger was too much, that crying made people uncomfortable, that dreaming too big made adults nervous. That being different meant being alone. So you adapted. You tucked pieces of yourself away like fragile things that didn't belong. You reshaped your voice to match what the world wanted to hear. You internalized the looks, the rules, the rewards, and you started following a script that was never written with your soul in mind. Carl Jung didn't see this as coincidence. He saw it as conditioning, an invisible shaping of the self from the outside in. It happened so gradually, so silently, that most people never question it. They don't realize that the life they're living is actually a performance built on keeping the peace, earning the approval, staying safe. But the cost? You lose access to the wild, unedited version of who you are. The version that existed before the world told you how to behave. The version that felt deeply, spoke honestly, moved intuitively. That self didn't disappear. It just went underground. Because the script said, be polite. Don't rock the boat. Make us proud. Don't be selfish. Do what's expected. Be good. And somewhere, under all of those lines, your voice got quieter. Until one day, you couldn't remember if the decisions you were making were truly yours, or just what you thought you were supposed to do. Career, relationships, even the way you walk into a room. They're all shaped by lines someone else rehearsed for you. But here's the thing. If the script was given to you, you can rewrite it. You can stop performing. You can stop pretending. You can look at the role you've been playing and ask with terrifying honesty, do I still want to be this person? Most people never ask. They just keep acting until the curtain falls. But if you're reading this, if something inside you is beginning to stir, you may already be stepping off the stage. And that's where real life begins. You don't just wear a mask. You forgot what your real face looks like. By now, you've probably realized something uncomfortable. You're not just following a script. You've become the character. The role society handed you wasn't just something you played. It became your second skin. And over time, that second skin hardened into a face you show the world. Polished, palatable, safe. Carl Jung called this the persona, the mask we wear to survive social life. It's not inherently bad. In fact, it's necessary. We need masks to function in a world built on interaction, expectation, and shared identity. But the danger? When the mask becomes so convincing, you start believing it is you. You say things that sound like you, but aren't. You pursue goals that look right but feel hollow. You smile in ways that don't reach your eyes. You offer versions of yourself that people can accept, but not the one you actually are. And it works. For a while. You gain approval. You fit in. You blend. But deep inside, something starts to ache. Because while the persona shines for the world, there's something else growing in the dark. Jung called it the shadow. Everything about you that didn't make the cut. Your real anger, your wild grief, your unwanted desires, your forbidden instincts, your forgotten gifts. Anything that didn't match the script, anything that made others uncomfortable, you pushed it down. But here's the truth Jung knew intimately. What we suppress doesn't disappear. It waits. The shadow doesn't go away when you ignore it. It gets louder, it leaks out. It shows up in your triggers, your overreactions, your self-sabotage, your nightmares, and the things you swear you hate in others. You ever find yourself judging someone harshly, without knowing why? You ever recoil at a trait in someone else, only to realize deep down, it reminds you of you? That's the shadow, speaking. It speaks in projection, in shame, in patterns that loop over and over, until you finally turn and face them. You see, the mask isn't the problem. The problem is forgetting that you're wearing one. The persona is the facade, but the shadow is the buried truth. And when you refuse to acknowledge your shadow, you give it power over your life from the dark. But when you turn toward it, when you say, I see you, you belong here too, that's when real integration begins, not self-improvement, self-remembrance. Because maybe you didn't lose your real self. Maybe you just buried it beneath all the roles, rules, and rehearsals, and maybe it's still waiting, patiently, painfully, for you to come back. To be loved, you sacrificed yourself, one piece at a time. It didn't happen all at once. You didn't wake up one day and decide, I'm going to abandon who I am so people will like me. No. It started slowly, quietly, like a steady erosion, one wave of disapproval at a time. Maybe it was when you cried and someone said, stop being so sensitive, or when you spoke up and they rolled their eyes, or when your imagination made them uncomfortable, so they told you to be realistic, or when you showed a part of yourself, something raw, something real, and they walked away. Each time, something inside you whispered, that part of me is not safe here. So you tucked it away. You hid your softness, your strangeness, your spark. You became smaller where you were once bold, quieter where you once spoke your truth and people liked you more. They called you easy to be around. They said you were mature for your age. They admired your composure. But underneath the praise was a quiet grief. They didn't love you. They loved your mask. Carl Jung understood this trade. He saw how children, then adults, reshape themselves into acceptable versions, all in the name of connection. And what do we call that reshaping? We call it being good, being well-adjusted, being normal. But Jung didn't equate adjustment with health. He saw it as a trap, because when you chase acceptance, you risk abandoning yourself. You stop showing up as the whole complex being you are, and you begin editing yourself for survival. The cost of that? You lose intimacy with the very person who matters most, you and the tragedy. Most people don't even realize they've done it. They think they've simply grown up. They think feeling numb is just part of adulthood. They think silence means peace. But peace isn't quiet desperation, and maturity isn't self-abandonment. Let's be honest. How many times have you said yes when every part of you was screaming no? How often have you bitten your tongue until it bled just to avoid the sting of being misunderstood? That isn't kindness. That isn't strength. That's fear, wrapped in politeness. We do it because we believe, deep down, that love is conditional, that being fully seen means being fully rejected, that if we show the parts we've hidden for so long, we'll lose everything. But here's the paradox. The more of yourself you hide, the less you feel truly loved, even when people stay, because their love isn't landing on the real you. It's hitting the performance. And some part of you knows that, so you keep trying harder. People-pleasing, overperforming, proving yourself again and again, hoping this time it'll finally feel real. But what if you stopped earning love? What if you stopped burning pieces of yourself to keep everyone else warm? Would anyone still stay? That's the terrifying question, but also the liberating one, because on the other side of that fear is a version of you that doesn't need to be approved of to exist. The parts of you you reject don't disappear. They return as everything you can't stand in others. You tried to hide it. The anger, the shame, the hunger, the parts of you that didn't feel lovable or acceptable or appropriate. You buried them under politeness. You smiled over the cracks. You convinced yourself that if you could just be good enough, those messy pieces would fade away. But they didn't, because what we suppress doesn't die. It waits. Carl Jung called it the shadow, and it is made of everything you've rejected in yourself. Every impulse that scared you, every thought you were punished for, every instinct that didn't fit the script. You think you've escaped it. You haven't. You've just handed it the keys to your unconscious mind. Because, here's the hard truth Jung revealed, what we refuse to face within returns as what we judge in others. Have you ever hated someone for being loud, selfish, dramatic, needy? Has someone triggered you so deeply that your reaction felt disproportionate? Chances are, they weren't the threat. They were the mirror, and what you saw in them, what disturbed you, was a reflection of the very thing you've tried to silence inside yourself. That's the shadow striking back, not to punish you, but to wake you up. You don't rage at others because you're cruel. You rage because their existence reminds you of the version of yourself you were forced to exile. That version, the unfiltered, unrefined, untamed self, is not your enemy. It's the piece of you that's still alive beneath the mask, and it's fighting to be remembered, because until you face the shadow, it will run you. It will show up as jealousy you can't explain, as self-sabotage right before something good happens, as attraction to the wrong people, as chronic dissatisfaction no matter how much you achieve. You think you're making choices, but the shadow, left unconscious, is choosing for you. It chooses the relationships you repeat, the conflicts you recreate, the limits you believe are just how you are. But here's the shift Jung offered. The shadow is not evil. It's simply unloved. It's your fire, your passion, your wildness, your unspoken strength. It's the part of you that remembers what you were before you were shaped. And it's waiting, not to destroy you, but to be reintegrated. Imagine this. What if the part of you you've spent your whole life avoiding is the very part holding the key to your freedom? What if healing isn't about becoming someone new, but recovering the self you were forced to betray? That's what shadow work is. Not fixing, not erasing, not denying, but meeting yourself in the dark and saying, "You're allowed to come home now." The parts you fear might actually be your greatest strength. We've been taught to fear our darkness, to see our flaws as failures, to treat anything unruly or emotional or unpredictable as a sign of weakness. So we build walls. We suppress the anger. We medicate the sadness. We silence the desire. But Carl Jung saw it differently. He didn't see the shadow as a disease to be cured. He saw it as a doorway, because within the parts of you you've pushed away are the very qualities you've been longing to reclaim. Your assertiveness, you called it aggression. Your sensitivity, you called it weakness. Your desire to speak truth, you buried it under keeping the peace. But what if your anger is your boundary trying to speak? What if your sadness is a signpost pointing toward what still needs healing? What if your fear is the call to courage, not the absence of it? We grow up thinking the shadow is dangerous, that looking inward means breaking down, that facing ourselves means we'll fall apart. But Jung believed the opposite. Growth doesn't come from eliminating the shadow. It comes from integrating it. Integration is the act of saying, "I will no longer exile parts of myself just to make others comfortable." It's not an excuse to act out. It's an invitation to own your story, all of it. Because here's the paradox. The more you try to control your shadow, the more it controls you. But the moment you turn toward it, with compassion instead of shame, it begins to soften. Suddenly, the jealousy you couldn't stand becomes a clue about your unmet desires. The rage you feared becomes a fire for justice. The insecurity you buried becomes a gateway to empathy. This is where personal power is born, not in perfection, not in pretending, but in wholeness. And let's be clear, wholeness is not the same as constant positivity. It's not being healed. It's being honest. It's having the courage to say, "This is who I am," light and dark, confident and afraid, soft and strong, becoming and remembering. This kind of honesty is rare, because it costs us the illusion of control, but it gives us something better: authenticity. The world doesn't need more polished masks. It needs more people who are brave enough to be real. And that kind of bravery begins not in the light, but in the shadows. "I know who I am" might be the biggest lie you tell yourself. We like to believe we know ourselves. We say it with conviction. "I know what I want. I know who I am. I know what I believe." But stop for a second. Who told you what to want? Who taught you what to believe? Who defined the version of you that you now protect so fiercely? Carl Jung warned us, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. That means the person you think you are might just be a surface-level construct, a blend of conditioning, reward systems, fears you never questioned, and dreams that were handed to you rather than chosen. You say you're independent, but does your independence come from confidence? Or a wound that told you no one would show up if you needed them? You say you're calm, but is that peace? Or is it emotional shutdown? You say you're driven, but are you chasing purpose? Or trying to outrun a sense of unworthiness? These are uncomfortable questions, but they're necessary. Because true self-knowledge doesn't come from affirmations. It comes from excavation. It comes from sitting with the parts of you that confuse you, from noticing the patterns you swore were just bad luck, from questioning the version of yourself that's been on autopilot for years. We confuse self-definition with self-awareness. But one is a performance, the other is a practice, and Jung knew this deeply. Most people mistake their persona, the mask, for the self. They mistake survival traits for identity, and they live entire lives defending a version of themselves that was created to avoid pain. Let that sink in. You might be protecting a self that never really belonged to you. That's why knowing yourself isn't a destination. It's a process of unlearning, of deconstruction, of quiet rebellion against everything that told you who you should be. And here's the twist. The more you think you have yourself figured out, the more likely it is that your shadow is still in control, because the ego loves certainty. But the soul grows through surrender, so instead of asking, "Who am I?" maybe start with, "Who taught me to be this?" The answers might shake you, but they'll also set you free. Your unconscious is always speaking. You've just forgotten how to listen. There's a voice inside you that's been trying to reach you for years. Not the voice in your head, the one that narrates, criticizes, and keeps score. Not the ego that plans, performs, and pleads for approval. No, a quieter voice, older, wiser, and often inconvenient. This voice doesn't shout, it whispers. It speaks through tension in your chest, through dreams that make no sense, through that sinking feeling when you say yes, but mean no, through the emptiness you feel when you get exactly what you thought you wanted, and still ache. Carl Jung understood this voice. He called it the unconscious, and he believed it is constantly communicating with us, not through logic, but through symbols, not through language, but through emotion, not through facts, but through patterns. But here's the tragedy. We've been taught to ignore it. From a young age, we're trained to trust what can be measured, to value what can be proven, to dismiss feelings as irrational and dreams as nonsense. So we scroll, we overwork, we distract ourselves with noise, with productivity, with performance. Why? Because silence is dangerous. Stillness makes space for what we've buried to rise, and part of us knows we might not be ready to face what's waiting there. But whether or not we listen, the unconscious keeps speaking. In every sabotaged relationship, in every panic attack we can't explain, in every pattern we swear we're done repeating, until we repeat it again. That's not weakness. That's a message, a red flag, a breadcrumb trail back to the parts of you that were never healed. Just hidden. Jung saw the unconscious not as chaos, but as a guide, a map, one that leads you not away from your life, but deeper into it, into the memories you've neglected, the instincts you've silenced, the fears you've labeled irrational that might actually be the most honest part of you. The problem isn't that your inner voice is silent. The problem is that you've stopped believing it matters. But think about this. Have you ever felt like your body knew the truth before your mind could admit it? Like you knew someone wasn't safe, even when they smiled? Like your soul resisted a decision, even though it looked perfect on paper? That's not overthinking. That's inner knowing. And the more you override it, the more disconnected you become, not just from truth, but from yourself. So what if, instead of always reaching outward for answers, you turned inward and asked, what part of me have I been ignoring? What truth have I been too scared to hear? What is my discomfort trying to show me? You don't need louder advice. You need deeper listening, because underneath all the noise, yourself is still speaking. You're not afraid of being alone. You're afraid of meeting yourself there. We say we hate silence. We fill it with podcasts, playlists, scrolling, chatter, anything to avoid the stillness. But it's not the silence itself we fear. It's what the silence might reveal. Because in the absence of distraction, something strange begins to happen. Your mind slows down. Your mask slips, and the parts of you you've kept at bay, your loneliness, your regret, your unprocessed pain, start to rise. Not because they want to hurt you, but because they've been waiting for you to finally stop running. Carl Jung knew this. He believed that much of human suffering comes not from our wounds themselves, but from our refusal to face them. And silence? Silence is the doorway. It's the space in which the unconscious can finally speak without being shouted over. But here's what's terrifying. Most people would rather live in distraction than sit in a room alone with their own soul. Why? Because we fear what we might find. What if the life you've built isn't what you truly want? What if your success has been driven by shame? What if your relationships are rooted in fear, not love? These aren't just thoughts. They're truths trying to surface. And silence is their only microphone. But we fight it. We call it boredom. We call it restlessness. We say, I just don't like being alone. But what we mean is, I don't want to feel what I've avoided for years. I'm scared that if I stop moving, I'll fall apart. If I stop performing, no one will love what's left. And so the cycle continues. We stay busy. We keep scrolling. We chase validation, stimulation, noise. But underneath it all is a deeper truth, Jung pointed to again and again. The parts of ourselves we refuse to face become the architects of our suffering. They influence our choices. They shape our relationships. They color our self-worth. And all the while, we think we're in control. So let's reframe it. What if silence isn't your enemy, but your invitation? What if solitude isn't punishment, but preparation? The preparation to finally see yourself, unfiltered, unedited, and yes, uncomfortable. Because only in the absence of noise can you truly hear what's real. Only when you stop running can you remember who you were before you started escaping. And yes, meeting yourself in the silence may shake everything you thought you knew, but it may also lead you somewhere you've never truly been. Home. If you don't become conscious of your pain, it will keep choosing your life for you. You think you've moved on, you changed your habits, you left the toxic relationship, you read the books, said the affirmations, started the new job, but then, without warning, you spiral again, you overreact, you shrink, you fall for the same kind of person, you sabotage the very thing you prayed for, and you wonder, why does this keep happening? Carl Jung had an answer, one of the most radical truths he ever shared. Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. In other words, you're not cursed, you're not broken, you're just being run by a wound you haven't faced yet, because pain doesn't vanish just because time passes. It burrows deeper, and from the dark, it starts making decisions for you. It chooses who you chase, what you fear, what you avoid, and even what you think you deserve. You think you're choosing independence, but really, you're just afraid to need anyone ever again. You think you're setting high standards, but really you're terrified of intimacy. You think you're protecting your peace, but really you're avoiding vulnerability at all costs. That's how trauma works. It rewires your instincts. It confuses self-protection with self-worth. It turns past events into present behaviors, without your permission. Let's make it real. A child who never felt seen grows into an adult who over-explains everything. A teen who was mocked for expressing emotion becomes an adult who never cries in front of anyone. Someone who was rejected early learns to reject themselves first, so no one else gets the chance. And from the outside, they look strong. But on the inside, they're still waiting for someone to come find the version of them that never got to heal. Here's the key insight. Unprocessed pain doesn't stay in the past. It becomes your pattern, and patterns will always repeat themselves until you interrupt them with awareness. Jung called this process shadow integration, not because the shadow is evil, but because it's full of information. It holds the blueprint for why you choose what you choose. It reveals the logic behind your irrational fears. It exposes the origin of that shame you can't quite explain. So the real question isn't, what's wrong with me? It's, what is this reaction trying to protect? What wound is still calling the shots? And what part of me still believes that safety means self-abandonment? The moment you stop trying to outrun the past and start listening to what it's still trying to teach you, that's the moment your choices become your own again. You are not one self, but many selves trying to be remembered. Who are you really? Not the name on your ID, not the job title on your email signature, not even the story you tell people when they ask, so what do you do? Carl Jung believed you are far more than that. He believed that deep within your psyche, beneath the noise of your daily life, beneath your wounds, beneath even your thoughts, exists something ancient, universal, and profoundly mysterious. Archetypes. These are not roles you choose. They are patterns you inherit, blueprints of behavior and energy that have existed across cultures, across centuries, across all human experience. Think of them like psychological DNA, timeless characters etched into the fabric of your unconscious. The hero, the lover, the mother, the seeker, the child, the wise old man, the trickster, the destroyer. They live not just in myths, movies, and fairy tales, but inside you, every time you long to rise above your limits, every time you resist your own transformation, every time you feel called to something more but can't explain why. That's an archetype moving through you. Let's make this tangible. You've heard of the hero's journey, the myth of someone, ordinary, who is called into the unknown, who must face trials, defeat monsters, and return home transformed. That's not just a story. That's you. Every time you've had to walk away from who you were. Every time you've left comfort behind to chase something real. Every time you've faced an inner dragon, you were living out the archetype of the hero. But the hero doesn't walk alone. Jung taught that wherever the hero appears, the shadow appears too. And not just as a villain out there, but as an inner force that resists change. It's the voice that says, "You're not good enough." The fear that says, "Stay small." The pattern that says, "Better the pain you know than the freedom you don't." In myth, the hero must face the shadow to grow. In real life, so must you. But the shadow is just one of many archetypes. There is also the innocent, the part of you that longs for purity, safety, simplicity. The rebel, who wants to break free from what no longer serves. The caregiver, who nurtures others, sometimes at the cost of themselves. The magician, who transforms pain into power, chaos into meaning. You carry all of these, not equally, not always at once, but they are there, waiting to be remembered. And here's the insight Jung left us with. Your life begins to change when you stop trying to become someone and start listening to who's already inside. Because maybe you're not lost. Maybe you've just been ignoring your inner cast of characters. Maybe the struggle isn't about finding your identity, but integrating the many faces of your soul. You won't evolve by defeating your shadow, but by listening to it. Every story has a hero, and every hero, eventually, meets a monster. But here's the twist Carl Jung offered, one that changes everything. The monster is you, not the you who smiles politely, not the you who follows the rules, but the part of you that was exiled, ignored, wounded, and left to grow wild in the dark. You've met this part before. It's the fear that grips you right before you take a risk. The voice that says, "You're not ready." The resistance that shows up every time you try to grow. It wears many faces: self-doubt, perfectionism, procrastination, destructive relationships, the inability to receive love without earning it, and you think, if I could just get rid of this part of me, then I'd be free. But that's not how real transformation works. The hero's journey isn't about conquering the shadow. It's about understanding it. It's about realizing the shadow isn't your enemy, it's your invitation, because your shadow holds the very things you've disowned. Your anger, that could become your boundaries. Your envy, that could point to your forgotten desires. Your fear, that could lead you back to your courage. But here's what makes it so hard. The shadow speaks in discomfort. It doesn't show up as wisdom, it shows up as chaos. So most people run. They stay in jobs that drain them. They repeat relationships that wound them. They cling to habits that numb them, all to avoid the confrontation that could set them free. Because meeting the shadow means looking at yourself without flinching. It means asking hard questions like, why do I keep sabotaging my own joy? What am I afraid will happen if I actually succeed? Who am I if I'm no longer performing for love? And that's terrifying, until it isn't. Because once you stop seeing the shadow as a curse, you begin to see it as a compass. It points directly to what's been asking for healing. It shows you where your power was buried. It reveals what version of you is trying to be born, if only you'll make room. You are both the hero and the shadow, both the one who wants to rise and the one who's afraid to let go. And the only way forward, not to pick a side, but to let them meet, to let them speak, and to listen for the wisdom hidden in the tension. This isn't self-improvement. It's self-integration. It's when the part of you that longs to grow finally makes peace with the part of you that's scared to change. That's not the end of the story. That's where the real story begins. You can't become whole if you're at war with half of yourself. There are parts of you you've never fully met, not because they're missing, but because the world taught you to reject them. Carl Jung called them the anima and the animus. The anima, your inner feminine. The animus, your inner masculine. These are not about gender. They are not stereotypes. They are energies, essential psychological forces within every human being, regardless of sex or identity. And here's where it gets real. When you reject one, you lose access to half your power. Let's start with the anima, the feminine within. This is the part of you that feels, that intuits, that dreams, nurtures, creates. It moves slowly, softly, deeply. It's the voice that says, "Be still, listen. There's more than logic here." But in a world that rewards hustle, dominance, and rationality, this part of you may have been labeled weak, overly emotional, irrational, dramatic, so you buried her. Then there's the animus, the masculine within. This is the part of you that acts, that sets boundaries, that protects, builds, speaks clearly. It's the voice that says, "Step forward, decide, take the lead." But if you were told that asserting yourself made you bossy, or that ambition made you unlikable, you may have muted him too. Now ask yourself, are you always giving but never receiving? Are you deeply sensitive but afraid to show it? Are you productive but disconnected from meaning? Do you struggle to speak up even when it matters? These are signs of imbalance. When one inner force dominates while the other is disowned. Jung believed that individuation, the journey toward wholeness, requires reuniting these energies. It means letting the anima teach the animus how to feel, and letting the animus help the anima take action. Let's bring this down to earth. A woman who embraces her animus learns to trust her voice, not just her heart. She stops waiting to be chosen, and chooses herself. A man who embraces his anima learns to listen more deeply. He stops hiding behind control and begins to connect with presence. This inner union changes everything. You no longer chase partners to complete you, because you've begun completing yourself. You no longer see softness as weakness. You see it as wisdom. You no longer overcompensate with strength. You use it to support, not suppress. This is what Jung meant when he said, "Wholeness is not achieved by cutting off a portion of one's being, but by integration." You don't need to become someone new. You need to reclaim what was always yours, the doing and the being, the fire and the water, the edge and the surrender. You were never meant to live in fragments. You were meant to be a symphony. You are not a solid self. You are a fluid becoming. We love to define ourselves. We say, "I'm an introvert. I'm a high achiever. I'm the dependable one. I'm the broken one. I'm the black sheep. I'm the anxious one." But what if none of those labels were actually true? What if they were just temporary stories, written to survive a moment that no longer exists? Carl Jung didn't believe in the self as something fixed. He saw identity not as a destination but a process, a continuous unfolding, shedding, remembering, dissolving, and reforming. And the greatest illusion? That you are only what you've known yourself to be, that your personality is permanent, that your patterns are your essence, that your past defines your future. But look closer. Haven't you surprised yourself before? Done something completely out of character? Something bold, soft, fearless, strange? Didn't that part feel real too? That's because you're not one self. You are a constellation of possibilities, a living, breathing spectrum of identities, some conscious, some hidden, all evolving. And yet, we cling to who we think we are because it feels safer than exploring who we might become. You say, "That's just how I am," but maybe that's just who you learned to be. A character shaped by family, culture, trauma, reward, an identity formed as armor, not expression. Jung called this illusion ego identity. It's the part of the mind that builds boundaries, defines roles, draws sharp lines between me and not me. The ego wants clarity, control, consistency, but the soul wants truth, expansion, depth. And the soul knows that you are not just one version of yourself frozen in time. You are fluid, even if you've spent years pretending to be solid. Here's the paradox. The more tightly you cling to a fixed identity, the more pain you invite. Because life is constantly changing, and if you don't let yourself change with it, you fracture, you stagnate, you repeat old cycles. You become a ghost in your own body, living a story that no longer fits. But what if you let go? What if you allowed yourself to not know who you are for a while? What if you loosened your grip on the label and listened instead to the longing? What might emerge from that space? Maybe a version of you who is softer or louder. Maybe someone more courageous, more honest. Maybe someone you've never dared to be but always felt inside. You are not your trauma. You are not your job. You are not even your personality. You are the awareness behind all of it. You are the one watching it unfold. You are the space between identities, not the identity itself. The question isn't, who am I? It's, who am I becoming when I stop trying to stay the same? You were never lost. You were simply waiting to be reclaimed. We spend our lives searching for meaning, for love, for clarity, for a version of ourselves that finally feels like home. We chase careers that promise fulfillment, relationships that promise completion, spiritual paths that promise transformation, and yet, so often, we arrive only to feel the same emptiness wearing a different name. But Carl Jung believed the journey was never about becoming something new. It was about returning to what was, always there, beneath the noise, the self you've been seeking. It's not out there. It's in here, waiting, watching, whispering. It watched you become what others needed. It watched you abandon your voice to keep the peace. It watched you forget your wildness, your softness, your strange and sacred hunger. And still, it never left. It waited patiently beneath the masks, beneath the trauma, beneath the performance. Because yourself isn't fragile. It's eternal. It's the thread that never broke even when you did. And now, after all the spirals, all the awakenings, all the unraveling, you're finally beginning to see. You didn't lose yourself. You adapted. You protected. You coped. And that was never wrong. That was survival. But now, you don't have to survive the same way anymore. You're allowed to reclaim the parts you exiled, to soften where you once hardened, to speak where you once stayed silent, to feel without filtering, to trust without proof. Because wholeness isn't about perfection, it's about integration. It's when your shadow sits beside your light, without shame. When your past doesn't define you but informs you. When you stop performing your worth and start embodying it. This is not a one-time moment. This is an unfolding, a becoming, a remembering. And yes, it's still terrifying. You may lose people. You may disappoint expectations. You may grieve the identity you built just to feel safe. But in return, you get you. Not the version molded by fear, but the self that's been calling you home since the beginning. So now the question is no longer, who am I supposed to be? But, am I ready to be all of who I already am? Take a breath. This isn't the end. This is the return. You made it here, through the masks, through the noise, through the quiet rooms where truth finally speaks. And maybe now, you understand what Carl Jung really meant when he said, life begins when you find yourself. But finding yourself isn't a single moment. It's not a breakthrough. It's not a new identity to wear like a better mask. It's a return to the child you silenced, to the intuition you buried, to the strength that once looked like too much, and the softness that once felt unsafe. It's not always beautiful. It's not always cinematic. Sometimes it's just you, sitting in the dark, whispering, I'm still here. And maybe for the first time that's enough, because you are not broken. You are becoming. And the path you're on now, it doesn't lead to someone new. It leads to someone true. So if this journey spoke to something in you, something quiet but undeniable, don't let it fade into the next scroll. Let it land. Pause. Let it echo. Let it open a door you've been afraid to knock on. And when you're ready, subscribe to MindLens, only if you're ready to see with new eyes. Leave a comment, not for the algorithm, but for your own reflection. Share this with someone who's quietly searching just like you. You never know who's waiting for a mirror, or a map, or a message they didn't know they needed. Until then, dim the lights, listen deeper, and remember, the self you've been seeking has always been waiting for you to come home.